If you like what I do, consider joining my channel or donating to my coffee. Links in the description. Metroidvania. It's one of the most confusingly broad terms in gaming. Depending on who you ask, it either means everything with a map and backtracking, or only the sacred blend of Metroid and Castlevania. Heck, there are even people out there who hate the term entirely and refuse to acknowledge it. I swear, if someone else corrects me with search action, I'm gonna puke. Search action. Let's gather the boys and search for some action, chaps. Quiet. Yeah, searching for action sounds riveting. While Metroidvania doesn't exactly tell outsiders what to expect, it's still way more interesting than search action. But call it whatever you want. Just give me and the hundreds of devs who use the term the same courtesy. The truth is, Metroidvania is a confusing term for non-gamers, but apparently it can be just as confusing for seasoned gamers too, because this subgenre of the platformer has splintered into all kinds of weird subgenres. From Metroid-Likes to Soulsvanias, from Microvanias to whatever the heck a Rougevania is, there are enough Vanias to make Dracula's head spin. And in this video, I'm gonna break them all down. By the end of this crash course in Metroidvania Taxonomy, you'll be able to tell your Igavanias from your Migavanias without breaking a sweat. But before we get into all the subgenres, we have to answer the big question. Before we go slapping the word Vania on everything like it's Frank's Red Hot, we gotta lay down the foundation. What even is a Metroidvania? At its core, a Metroidvania is an action-adventure platform game where exploration is the star of the show. You're plopped into a giant interconnected world, and instead of just running left to right until you hit credits, the game basically says, good luck, nerd, you figure it out. You'll find doors you can't open, paths you can't reach, and enemies that absolutely body you, until you come back later with some shiny new ability that changes the game. That's the secret sauce. Power-ups aren't just your sword does more damage now, they open up the map itself. A double jump, a grappling hook, a morph ball, even a talking hat if you're fancy. Progression is baked into exploration, and exploration is what fuels progression. It's a beautiful little loop that makes you feel like an adventurer unraveling a world's secrets piece by piece. And yes, RPG mechanics like XP, stats, and gear upgrades can be part of the package, but they're not required. The real heart of the genre is exploration, ability gating, and that feeling of becoming a godlike version of the underdog who started with a butter knife and no clue where to go. So now we've got a working definition of what makes a game a Metroidvania. But that still leaves one very important question. Why the heck did we call it that in the first place? This section's probably old news for the old heads, so if that's you, feel free to skip ahead. The term Metroidvania is exactly what it sounds like. A mashup, or portmanteau for maximum pretentiousness, of Metroid and Castlevania. And no, it didn't just magically appear on stone tablets handed down from Miyamoto and Igarashi. The word came from the fans. Most people credit Jeremy Parrish and Scott Sharkey over at OneUp.com, who first used it in 2003 to describe the Castlevania GBA games. Of course, games with a Metroid-like structure existed long before then. You had Below the Root that predates Metroid, Metroid itself, and the Wonder Boy series with all its messy offshoots, just to name a few. But it wasn't until the late 90s that the formula got such a massive upgrade that fans felt the need for a new genre name. In 1997, Castlevania Symphony of the Night completely reinvented the series on PlayStation. Before that, Castlevania was mostly linear. Hard-as-nails obstacle courses where Dracula's castle was more of a gauntlet than a playground. But Symphony changed everything. One big interconnected map, a focus on exploration, upgrades unlocking new paths. That's right, Symphony had taken huge inspiration from The Legend of Zelda. But because Symphony was a side-scroller, it felt way closer to Metroid. Unless you remember Zelda 2, and nobody wants to do that. So fans needed a new term to describe this Castlevania style that borrowed DNA from both Metroid and Zelda. And thus, Metroidvania was born, because Zeldavania didn't sound goofy enough, I guess. The word started as message board slang, but eventually spread so far that even developers started using it in marketing. These days, you can't escape the word Metroidvania, love it or hate it. And speaking of love it or hate it, here's where things get messy. As the genre grew, fans started slicing it into smaller and smaller categories. Which brings us to the real meat of this video, the Metroidvania Taxonomy. Let's start with a visual aid. Here's how I like to picture it. Metroidvania is the ground, the earth, the rich soil everything grows from, the foundation of the entire genre and its general umbrella term. From that ground, a single tree grows, and carved into its trunk is the word Metroid. But as the tree grows, the trunk eventually splits in two directions. One limb reads Vania, and the other Like. This section, this bifurcation, is where a great majority of Metroidvania titles reside. The Like limb represents Metroid-Likes, games that stick closer to Nintendo's original blueprint. These focus on pure exploration, simple but meaningful power-up progression, and atmosphere-driven design. Think Super Metroid or Axiom Verge. The Vania limb represents games that lean hard into RPG mechanics, leveling systems, loot, equipment, builds, and combat depth. If you're fighting monsters for drops and grinding levels, you're on the Vania side of the tree. Here, you'll find games like Symphony of the Night and Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. And from both limbs, branches grow. These are the categories or sub-subgenres that can live on either side. Sometimes a category can be either, but those are the outliers and it's not something you need to overthink. I'm just trying to make things simple here. Point is, each branch has its own flavor, but no matter how far they stretch, they're still rooted in the same ground as a Metroidvania. Before we get started, let's have a little fun and see how knowledgeable you are. I'm going to give you some MV titles, and you tell me in which category you think they belong. Remember your choices or write down your responses in the comments. I'll reveal the answers at the end of the video. Alright, your first title, Hollow Knight. Where does it land on the MV tree? Next, Ghost Song. Where you putting blue? Next, how about Blasphemous? Where would Penitente belong? Next up, Gato Roboto. Where would you place Kiki? And lastly, Afterimage. Where would you place this masterpiece? Alright, I hope you got your answers locked in. Make sure to stick around to the end of the video to get your answers. As for now, let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at each of these subgenres. Metroid-Likes are the purest form of the genre. They strip the Metroidvania formula down to its raw essence: exploration, discovery, and ability-based progression. No fluff, no grinding, no elaborate stat screens, just you, a map, and the upgrades you need to push deeper. Some examples of Metroid-Likes would include Super Metroid, the gold standard where Metroid-Like gets its name, and Axiom Verge, a modern indie take with some twists, but still very true to the Metroid spirit. Fans of Metroid-Likes love the purity. These games give you that raw feeling of being lost in an alien world, with every new ability opening the door to more secrets. They're for players who want exploration without the distraction of stats and builds. Just pure adventure. This is where categorization gets weird because this subgenre's name is the same as the umbrella term's name. But what are you gonna do? Where Metroid-Likes keep it pure, the Vania side of the tree adds layers. These games borrow from RPGs, giving you levels, stats, loot, and build variety, while keeping the same exploration-driven structure. It's the action RPG version of the formula. Let's take a look at some examples. Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom. It emphasizes transformation-based abilities while blending light RPG progression with a whimsical tone. Then there's Valda's Story, Abyssal City. Deep combat, multiple playable characters, and a rich mix of gear, skills, and alignment choices that affect your build. And then there's also my favorite, Ender Lily's Quietus of the Nights, a somber, atmospheric journey with spirit-based abilities and a light but impactful RPG layer. These are the Metroidvanias for players who want depth alongside exploration. If you enjoy experimenting with weapons, grinding for loot, or crafting a build that fits your playstyle, this is your limb of the tree. For many fans, it's the perfect blend of progression and player expression. Now, Metroid-Likes and Vanias are the two main limbs of the tree, but the branches growing off of them, that's where things get really interesting. Let's start diving into these subcategories. Igavania is the nickname for Metroidvanias designed in the style of Koji Igarashi, the famed Castlevania producer. These games blend exploration with heavy RPG mechanics, experience points, leveling, loot, and equipment systems, while maintaining a castle, or castle-like, labyrinth as their core setting. Some examples would include Castlevania Symphony of the Night, the gold standard, blending tight exploration with RPG depth. Then we have Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, Igarashi's spiritual successor, doubling down on gear, loot, and builds. And then we have Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, one of the GBA entries that shows Igarashi's signature layering of RPG mechanics onto exploration. Igavanias are the most famous Vania branch because they give players both freedom and complexity. Fans love tinkering with builds, farming for rare drops, and finding ways to break the game with creative gear setups, all while exploring massive, labyrinthine castles. A Migavania is a Metroidvania created by Megami Games, the indie team best known for their lovingly crafted, retro-styled entries into the genre. Much like Igavania, this category exists to spotlight a particular studio whose body of work is so distinct and consistent that it deserves its own label. Megami's titles typically feature lush 16-bit pixel art, sprawling maps, tight platforming, and a clear reverence for Castlevania. While Megami Games has created a lot of homages to Castlevania, they really only have a couple of noteworthy Metroidvanias under their belt. The first is Castlevania The Locard Chronicles, specifically the second game in the series. It's a fan-made Metroidvania with professional level polish, combining gothic horror atmosphere with intricate exploration. Then you have their latest game, Chronicles of the Wolf. It's a Migavania original, showing their flair for epic storytelling, deep lore, and intricate level design. Fans flock to Migavanias because their games feel like love letters to the golden age of Castlevania and Metroidvanias. They bring the nostalgia of Symphony of the Night and Super Metroid while still adding fresh twists, modern design sensibilities, and a level of consistency you can rely on. If you're picking up a Megami game, you know exactly what kind of quality, style, and adventure you're about to dive into. Soulsvania refers to Metroidvanias that fuse the genre's exploration-driven structure with mechanics and philosophies inspired by Dark Souls and the wider Soulsborne family. These games keep the non-linear maps and upgrades of Metroidvanias, but layer on punishing combat, risk-reward death systems, and heavier tones of despair and mystery. One of the best examples of a Soulsvania is Salt and Sanctuary. It is the blueprint Soulsvania, blending Souls combat with a 2D Metroidvania structure. Then we have The Last Faith, a gothic horror aesthetic with Souls-inspired combat, offering punishing difficulty wrapped in a Metroidvania framework. And then there's Grime, surreal and oppressive, with stamina-based combat and challenging bosses that echo Soulsborne design. Soulsvanias attract players who enjoy grueling but rewarding combat, atmospheric worlds, and the thrill of overcoming brutally difficult bosses. They offer the satisfaction of Metroidvania exploration alongside the tension of Souls-like risk management. Rougevanias blend the exploration and upgrades of a Metroidvania with the procedural generation and permadeath mechanics of roguelikes. Instead of a handcrafted world you conquer once, Rougevanias offer replayability. Each run reshuffles the map and loot, pushing you to adapt on the fly while building permanent upgrades across multiple playthroughs. Rougevania is another tough one to pin down because it can mean two things: roguelike plus Castlevania, or roguelike plus Metroidvania. Most roguelikes play more like Castlevania, or tough combat-focused platformers, and aren't included in the Metroidvania genre. However, there are a couple of rare instances of roguelike plus Metroidvanias out there now to consider Rougevania a real Metroidvania category. One example is Sundered, a Rougevania with chaotic combat against swarms of enemies with procedurally generated layouts and multiple endings. And then there's Chasm, where dungeons shift every playthrough, offering a fresh take on exploration with handcrafted style design mixed with randomization. Rougevanias thrive on variety. No two runs feel the same, and the constant cycle of death, growth, and discovery makes them endlessly replayable. They're perfect for players who crave both the exploration of a Metroidvania and the unpredictability of a roguelike. And that finishes the Vania side of the tree. Let's return now to the Metroid-like side. Microvanias are compact, bite-sized Metroidvanias designed around short play sessions. They retain the core hallmarks of the genre, exploration, upgrades, and backtracking, but condense them into tight, focused worlds. Every room, puzzle, and enemy is carefully designed so players can enjoy meaningful progress without committing dozens of hours. An example would be Metroid, a minimalist Microvania where the entire adventure unfolds inside the map itself. No combat, no platforming, just pure exploration and item-based progression. Then there's Bon Appetit, an irreverent, retro-styled Microvania where you raise a skeleton to steal food, unlocking powers and weapons in a chaotic quest for culinary justice. And then there's Trash Quest, a compact sci-fi Metroidvania starring a trash-obsessed raccoon, featuring tight platforming, run-and-gun combat, and a single spawn point that anchors its interconnected world. Microvanias are great for players who crave the Metroidvania experience but don't have time for sprawling worlds. They're perfect for learning mechanics quickly and enjoying a full adventure in a compact package. MetroidBRAInias are puzzle-focused games where the true challenge isn't in combat or platforming, but in solving brain-teasing riddles, logic puzzles, and progression-based conundrums. Exploration is still central, but the world unfolds primarily through clever problem-solving rather than reflex-driven gameplay. The weird thing about MetroidBRAInias, other than everyone hates the name, yet hasn't come up with a better one that's stuck, is that most games in this genre are not Metroidvanias at all. Fez is just a straight-up platformer, Tunic is a Souls-like / Zelda hybrid, and Outer Wilds is an exploration / walking simulator. MetroidBRAInias run the gamut in terms of the actual types of games they can be, and fortunately, there are actually a few that are true Metroidvanias. A great example is Animal Well, a dense, atmospheric Metroidvania designed with multiple layers for players to discover. Then there's Vision Soft Reset, which blends time manipulation with exploration, making puzzles the core of progression. And then we have the newest kid on the block, Ulo, an isometric, exploration-driven puzzle Metroidvania that prioritizes brain power over combat. MetroidBRAInias appeal to players who want their minds challenged as much as, or more than, their hands. They flip the genre's expectations by replacing combat mastery with mental mastery, delivering that same satisfaction of unlocking new areas, just through intellect instead of brute force. Okay, I made this one up, but hear me out. Kylevanias are Metroidvanias created by indie developer Kyle Thompson, whose work has carved out a distinct identity within the genre. Just as Igavania highlights Koji Igarashi's unique influence on Metroidvanias, and Migavania celebrates Mig Perez's contributions with Castlevania, the Lacard Chronicles, and Chronicles of the Wolf, the Kylevania exists to showcase the unmistakable style and substance that Kyle Thompson consistently brings to the table. First off, he gave us Sheepo, a quirky, exploration-heavy platformer centered on capturing creatures to gain abilities. Then there was Islets, a heartfelt, painterly adventure where reconnecting floating islands creates both narrative and mechanical progression. And then his latest masterpiece, Crypt Custodian, a cozy yet challenging overhead Metroidvania where you play as a ghostly cat janitor cleaning up the afterlife. Kylevanias are approachable yet clever, whimsical yet heartfelt. They represent the comfort food side of Metroidvanias, games that balance wonder, charm, and accessibility without sacrificing the sense of adventure and discovery that defines the genre. There's another term you'll hear sometimes while hanging in the Metroidvania community, and that's Classicvania. You'll notice Classicvania isn't on the tree, And that's because these games aren't actually Metroidvanias. Classicvanias refer to the pre-Metroidvania Castlevania games, which leaned heavily on linear stage progression rather than freeform exploration. And since they're not Metroidvanias, I'll just leave it at that. I wanted to make sure you knew what they were because you will hear this term while scouring Reddit and other forums. Okay, now that you've finished your crash course in Metroidvania Taxonomy, let's see how you do on the quiz. Where does Hollow Knight land on the MV tree? It's a Metroid-Like. A lot of people confuse it for a Soulsvania thanks to its high difficulty, boss runbacks, corpse running, and storytelling style. But with no leveling system, stat-based builds, or stat-focused gear, it's missing the core RPG mechanics a true Souls-like has. And on the gameplay side of things, the knight moves way too fast to be a Souls-like protagonist, and he doesn't have to worry about stamina management. Plus, he doesn't even slop roll. Next, Ghost Song. Where's it go? Ghost Song is a Metroidvania, or more specifically, a Soulsvania. Though Ghost Song's leveling system is much more basic than your typical Souls-like, it has all the other hallmarks. Stamina, multiple weapons, and a slop roll in the form of a dash. And of course, it has archaeological storytelling and can be quite difficult. Next, how about Blasphemous? Where would Penitente belong? Blasphemous is a Metroid-like. Blasphemous gets confused as a Souls-like pretty much for the same reasons Hollow Knight does. It's hard and has corpse running, but a great majority of all of Penitente's character progression is based on what you discovered during exploration, a hallmark of Metroid-likes. Next, Gato Roboto. Where would you put Kiki? Gato Roboto is a Metroid-like, or more specifically, a Microvania. Gato clocks in at about 2 to 3 hours, given how observant and quick you are, making it a Microvania. Lastly, Afterimage. Where would you place this masterpiece? Afterimage is a Metroidvania, or more specifically, an Igavania. Though not a true Igavania, as Koji Igarashi wasn't involved, Afterimage does a lot of things that Igavanias are known for. Leveling, gear, multiple weapons and animations, weapon skills, enemy loot drops, and much more. Purists may scoff at calling it an Igavania, but to me, it's a spiritual Igavania. How'd you do on the quiz? Let me know in the comments as I finally wrap this video up. Alright, that's a wrap on the Metroidvania taxonomy. From the roots of Metroid to the sprawling tree of Vania, I hope you've got a clearer picture of all the weird, wild, and wonderful subcategories this genre has grown into. I know there's a ton of Metroidvanias out there as the genre is pretty old, but it's clear Metroidvanias aren't stuck in the past. They're constantly evolving, branching into new styles, and I wouldn't be surprised to see even more categories sprouting in the years to come. Which Metroidvania type is your favorite? Or is there a weird hybrid I didn't cover that you think deserves its own branch? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button, and if you want more Metroidvania content, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new video. And hey, if you learned something new today, share this video with a friend and help them navigate the tangled tree of Metroidvanias. Until next time, later nerds.